Marriage, I had always believed, was about weathering storms together. But somewhere along the way, Laura and I had drifted into something else, something colder, emptier. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a rough patch that would smooth itself out. But as the months dragged on, I realized I was the only one fighting to keep us connected. Laura had stopped meeting me halfway. She hadn't always been like this. When we first got married, she was full of life, laughing at my corny jokes, holding my hand in crowded streets, and sneaking kisses when no one was looking. But the woman who now sat across from me at the dinner table was different. She barely looked up from her phone. Conversations had turned into one-sided monologues, mostly about what I wasn't doing right. And the worst part? I had no idea how we got here. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Wednesday, an ordinary, uneventful evening. I had just finished setting the table, hoping we could share a quiet meal together. Laura arrived home late, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She barely acknowledged me before dropping her bag on the couch. I waited, expecting the usual small talk about work, but instead, she sighed and leaned against the counter, her expression unreadable. "I need a break," she said suddenly. I froze, the fork in my hand hovering over my plate. "A break." She exhaled, as if she had been carrying the weight of this conversation for weeks. "Yeah, just a month. I need some space to figure things out." I searched her face, trying to understand. "Laura, what's wrong? Are you unhappy?" She waved a hand in the air, irritated. "It's not that simple, Andy. I feel stuck. Our life is so predictable." "You're predictable." She looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't noticed before: boredom. The word stung more than I expected. Predictable. Boring. Had I really become that? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "So, you're saying you want space because I'm boring?" She sighed again, running a hand through her hair. "I just need time to breathe. I need to find myself again." There was something rehearsed about the way she said it, like she had been practicing those words in front of a mirror. I wanted to argue, to tell her that marriage wasn't about taking breaks whenever things got tough, but instead, I just nodded numbly. "How long?" I asked. "A month," she said quickly. "Just 1 month, I promise." It felt like a lie, but I didn't fight her. Maybe she really did need space. Maybe this would be good for us. So, I let her go. The first few days were unbearable. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I found myself reaching for my phone, only to remember she wasn't there to text back. The bed was too big. The mornings felt off without her usual complaints about coffee being too strong or the weather being too cold. I tried to keep myself busy. I worked late, hit the gym more often, even started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told myself she just needed time, that she would come back, that this wasn't the beginning of the end. Then, 3 weeks into her break, I saw the video. I was scrolling through social media absent-mindedly, not looking for anything in particular, when I saw it. A video someone had reposted from a travel influencer's page. It showed a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Aegean Sea in Santorini. Whitewashed buildings, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink. And then I saw her. Laura. She was sitting at an outdoor cafe, dressed in a flowing sundress, her hair windswept and glowing under the Grecian sun. And she wasn't alone. A man, younger, tanned, and effortlessly confident, was sitting across from her. He leaned in close, whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back in laughter. The kind of laughter I hadn't heard from her in years. The kind of laughter she used to share with me. My stomach twisted into knots. My hands trembled as I watched, over and over again, looking for something, anything, that might tell me this wasn't what it seemed. But it was exactly what it seemed. Laura wasn't in Santorini alone, trying to find herself. She was there with him, smiling, glowing, drinking wine at sunset. And she had never looked happier. The comments under the video were relentless. "OMG, this couple is gorgeous. Couple goals. Santorini romance, smiling face with hard eyes, look at the way he looks at her. She's so lucky." I felt sick. Lucky? Was I really that blind? Had she been planning this all along? The realization hit me like a freight train. Laura didn't take a break to find herself. She took a break to replace me. And just like that, something inside me snapped. The hurt, the confusion, the guilt I had been carrying, it all vanished, replaced by something colder. Rage. I closed the app, threw my phone onto the couch, and pressed my palms against my face. My breathing was shallow, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. She hadn't even tried to hide it. She had let the world see it. She wanted me to see it. For weeks, I had been mourning the loss of our marriage, blaming myself, thinking I had been too dull, too predictable. But it wasn't me. It was never me. Laura had been looking for an excuse to leave. She just hadn't had the courage to say it outright. So instead, she fed me lies, made me feel small, and then went off to live her best life while I sat here, waiting for her like a fool. I clenched my jaw, my body tense with the weight of realization. If she wanted to be free, then fine. But when she came back, she wouldn't find the same Andy waiting for her. She would find a new Andy, one who didn't need her anymore. And by the time she realized what she had lost, it would be too late. Days passed. Then a week. Then two. I didn't hear from Laura. I told myself I wouldn't call first. She was the one who wanted space. She was the one who walked away. But as much as I wanted to act indifferent, the silence ate at me like a slow poison. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the video in my head. That laugh, that carefree glow on her face. The way she leaned into that guy as if he were the only man in the world. That used to be me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Santorini, golden sunsets, candlelit dinners. A life that looked like a dream while I sat here in the wreckage of a marriage she had already abandoned. I had gone from feeling devastated to furious. And yet, I waited. It happened on a Friday night. My phone rang just as I was pouring myself a drink, her name on the screen like a slap in the face. Laura. I let it ring twice before answering, forcing my voice to stay calm. She didn't deserve to know how broken I felt. Hey, she said, her tone light. Too light. I stayed silent for a second. Hey, how have you been? She asked, as if she had just gone on a weekend getaway instead of leaving our marriage hanging by a thread. How have I been? I repeated, gripping my glass. Laura, are you serious? She exhaled. Andy, please. Don't make this a thing. A thing? I sat down slowly, my pulse quickening. You disappear for a month. You tell me you need space. And then, I see a video of you in Santorini with some guy? And you're telling me not to make this a thing? There was a pause on the other end. Oh, come on, she finally said, her voice carrying that familiar condescending lilt. You're overreacting. Overreacting. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. So, I'm just imagining it? You weren't in Greece with another man. She sighed, annoyed now. Yes, I was. But Andy, it wasn't what you think. It was just fun. Something in me snapped. Just fun. Like our marriage, our vows, meant nothing. Like I was some old sweater she had thrown in the back of her closet while she ran off to chase excitement. So, that's what this was about. I said coldly, you needed a break. But really, you just wanted permission to sleep around? That's not fair, she shot back. I told you I needed space, and you agreed. I didn't cheat, Andy. I just let loose a little. I needed to feel alive again. Her words hung in the air, sharp and jagged. Needed to feel alive. And what was I? Just a weight dragging her down. My grip tightened around my phone. You could have told me the truth instead of making me feel like I was the problem. She scoffed. Andy, you are the problem. You're stuck in the same routine, doing the same things. It's like you don't even want more out of life. I clenched my jaw. All this time, she hadn't been looking for space. She had been looking for an escape. And the worst part? She had no guilt about it. Something inside me shifted then. The part of me that was waiting, hoping, died right there on that phone call. I'm glad you had fun, I said, my voice steady now. Because when you come back, I won't be here waiting. For the first time, Laura hesitated. Andy, don't be like that. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The house around me felt heavier, colder. Laura had been gone for a month, but this was the first time I truly felt alone. I poured another drink, but even that didn't help. The anger had settled too deep, burning beneath my skin. I had spent years giving everything to a woman who never truly valued me. And that realization cut deeper than anything else. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message. Ruth, hey Andy, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Ruth, Laura's best friend. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. Not really. She responded almost instantly. Want to talk? I hesitated. Ruth and I had never really been close. She had always been around, sure, but she was Laura's friend first, not mine. Still, right now, I needed someone. Someone who wasn't pretending my pain didn't matter. So I called her. Ruth picked up on the second ring. Hey. I ran a hand through my hair. Hey. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I saw the video. Of course, she had. It was all over social media. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew. I exhaled sharply. Guess that makes me the last idiot to figure it out. You're not an idiot, Ruth said, her voice soft but firm. You just love the wrong person. The words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed. She didn't even try to deny it. Just told me it was fun. Ruth sighed. I wish I could say I'm surprised. But honestly, Laura's been selfish for a long time. I frowned. You think so? I know so. There was something in her tone that made me sit up. Ruth, is there something you're not telling me? She hesitated. I probably shouldn't say this, but Laura used to talk about you like you were some obligation instead of her husband. She made it seem like you were just holding her back. I let out a humorless laugh. Of course she did. But Andy, Ruth's voice softened. She was wrong. For the first time that night, I felt something shift inside me, a flicker of warmth in all the cold. We talked for hours. About Laura. About the years I had wasted. About how I had spent so much time trying to make someone happy who had never truly loved me. By the time I hung up, something had changed. Laura had taken her break. She had found her fun. But when she came back, she wouldn't find the same man waiting for her. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who needed to move on. The night I spoke to Ruth, something inside me shifted. For the first time since Laura had left, I didn't feel completely alone. I didn't expect Ruth to understand me so well. I didn't expect her voice to be the one that finally pulled me out of the haze of anger and betrayal. But she did. And as the days passed, our conversations became more frequent. At first, it was innocent, late-night calls, texts throughout the day, casual check-ins. But beneath it all, there was something else. Something neither of us wanted to name. One evening, Ruth invited me over for dinner. Just as friends, she said. You shouldn't be alone all the time. I hesitated before agreeing. Part of me knew this was dangerous, but the truth was, I needed the company. When I arrived, she greeted me at the door with a warm smile. Hope you're hungry, she said, stepping aside to let me in. The house smelled like something rich and buttery, and for a moment, I was transported back to a time when home felt like home. We ate in the living room, plates balanced on our laps, laughter mixing with the sound of an old record playing in the background. It felt natural, easy. Halfway through dinner, I set my fork down and sighed. I still don't understand why Laura did it. Why she just walked away. Ruth studied me for a long moment before speaking. Andy, I think you've spent too much time trying to understand someone who never really valued you. I looked at her, something tight twisting in my chest. She hesitated before adding, Laura treated you like an accessory, not a partner. She wanted excitement, not stability. And that's not your fault. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. You make it sound so simple. She smiled sadly. It is simple. She never deserved you. Something about the way she said it made my stomach flip. After dinner, we moved to the couch, a bottle of wine between us. At some point, I stopped thinking about Laura. I stopped thinking about the betrayal, the hurt. I stopped thinking about everything except the woman sitting next to me. The way she listened, the way she looked at me like I mattered. And before I could stop myself, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. For a long moment, we just sat there, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Then, slowly, Ruth shifted closer. This is a bad idea, she whispered, though she made no move to pull away. I know, but I didn't let go. And neither did she. The kiss was slow, hesitant, the kind that could either be a mistake or the beginning of something inevitable. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like revenge. But when I pulled her against me, when she let out the softest sigh against my lips, I knew the truth. This wasn't about Laura anymore. This was about us. More than a mistake, we spent the night together. And when I woke up, tangled in the sheets, Ruth asleep beside me, I expected regret to settle in. But it didn't. Instead, I felt peaceful. Like for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Ruth stirred, blinking up at me with a sleepy smile. "Morning. Morning," I murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her smile faded slightly. "Are we going to talk about this?" I exhaled, rolling onto my back. I don't know what to say. She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "I do." I turned my head toward her. She hesitated before whispering, "I've had feelings for you for years, Andy. But out of loyalty to Laura, I never acted on them." I stared at her, stunned. "What?" She gave a sad little laugh. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just admiration. But every time I saw Laura dismiss you, every time she made you feel like you weren't enough, I wanted to shake you and tell you that you deserved better. My breath caught in my throat. "And now?" I asked, my voice rough. She looked at me with quiet certainty. "Now? I don't have to hide it anymore." I swallowed hard, emotions crashing over me. Laura had made me feel invisible. But Ruth? She saw me. She always had. And for the first time since my marriage fell apart, I realized I wasn't broken. I was just waiting for someone who truly cared. I knew the day would come. It had been exactly a month since Laura walked out of our marriage, claiming she needed a break. A month since I watched her dance through Santorini with another man as if our years together had been nothing more than a passing phase. But I wasn't the same man she had left behind. The old Andy, the one who had spent years trying to please her, bending to her every demand, waiting for her to love him the way he deserved, was gone. And when Laura finally returned, expecting to step back into her life like nothing had changed, she found a very different version of me waiting. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open. For a second, I froze, gripping the counter as a wave of emotion surged through me. But I didn't turn. I didn't rush to greet her. Let her come to me. There was the sound of heels clicking against the hardwood floor, then a familiar voice, light and casual, as if she had only been gone for a weekend trip. "Well," Laura sighed, setting her bags down with a thud. That was refreshing. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip, and finally turned to face her. She looked almost exactly the same, hairstyled to perfection, lips painted in that deep red shade she always wore when she wanted attention. But something was different. She expected to see her Andy, the man who once worshipped the ground she walked on. Instead, she found someone who had stopped waiting for her to decide if he was worth loving. Her smile faltered. "You're quiet," she remarked, tilting her head. "Not even a welcome back?" I set my glass down. "You never said goodbye." She laughed, brushing off the tension. "Come on, Andy, don't be dramatic." I didn't take the bait. I just watched her, letting the silence settle. Something flickered in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even unease. "So," she continued, "how have things been? Did you miss me?" I let out a slow breath. "I moved on, Laura." She blinked. "What?" I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I didn't sit around waiting for you to decide if our marriage was worth saving. You wanted space. You took it. And I realized I deserved better." Her smile wavered. "Andy, I just needed some time to do what?" I cut in, my voice steady. "To pretend you were single for a month? To explore your options?" She rolled her eyes. "It wasn't like that." I shook my head. "It was exactly like that." Her eyes darted to the side, as if she were searching for the right words. The ones that would pull me back in. And then, "What's this I hear about you and Ruth?" Ah, there it was. I barely reacted, and that seemed to bother her more than anything. "You're seeing my best friend?" Laura asked, folding her arms. "How long did it take before you jumped into her bed?" I exhaled. "This isn't about you, Laura." She laughed, but it was forced, brittle. "Of course, it's about me. You're sleeping with my best friend, Andy. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I tilted my head. "Oh, like watching my wife on social media, laughing in another man's arms while I sat at home, wondering if she would ever come back." Her jaw tightened. For the first time, she seemed to realize that she had lost control of the conversation. "I just needed time to figure things out," she tried again, her voice softer now. I never stopped loving you, Andy. I got scared. Things felt too routine, and I didn't know how to handle it. I studied her carefully. You mean you got bored? She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, reaching out to touch my arm. Look, we've been through too much to throw it all away. I made a mistake, but I came back, didn't I? I took a step back, and her hand fell away. That's the thing, Laura, I said quietly. You think coming back erases what you did, but it doesn't. It just proves that you assumed I'd be here, waiting. Her lips parted slightly, but she had no response. So I gave her one last thing to hold on to. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the divorce papers. I set them on the counter between us, watching her face shift from confidence to shock. What is this? She stammered. It's exactly what it looks like. She shook her head. No, you don't mean this. I nodded. I do. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the papers, flipping through them like she could somehow undo what had already been set in motion. This isn't fair, she whispered. You didn't even give me a chance to fix things. I met her gaze. I did. You just didn't care until you realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Silence. She stood there, still holding the papers, her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time since she walked through the door, I saw it in her eyes, the truth she had been avoiding. She had lost me, and I wasn't coming back. Laura didn't sign the papers that night. She left in a huff, muttering about how unfair I was being, how I had betrayed her. But I didn't chase after her. I didn't try to explain myself. I simply let her go. And as the door shut behind her, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Because for the first time in years, I was finally free. I should have known Laura wouldn't go down without a fight. When she walked out that night, clutching the divorce papers with a look of betrayal on her face, I had hoped, naively, that she would accept reality. That she would see this for what it was, the natural consequence of her own actions. But Laura had never been the type to accept defeat. And now, she was playing a different game. One far more dangerous. It started subtly at first. Ruth and I had settled into something real, something good. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly valued. With Ruth, I didn't have to try so hard. I didn't have to prove my worth. Then, out of nowhere, she started acting different. A slight hesitation in her touch. A flicker of doubt in her eyes when I spoke. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I noticed her mind was elsewhere. She had barely touched her wine, and her fingers nervously twisted the hem of her sweater. Ruth, I said, setting my glass down. What's wrong? She hesitated. Then as she sighed, I met with Laura today. I stiffened, every muscle in my body going tight. Ruth looked down at her hands, avoiding my gaze. She called me this morning. Said she needed to talk. I figured. I owed her that much. I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. And Ruth shifted uncomfortably. She was a mess, Andy. She said she's lost everything. That she never meant for things to go this far. That she still loves you. I scoffed. Right. She loves me now that I'm done with her. Ruth flinched at my tone. She also said something else. I waited. She said I betrayed her, Ruth admitted. That I was supposed to be her best friend. That she confided in me for years, trusted me, and I stole you from her. I exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over my face. Ruth, she's manipulating you. I know, she whispered. I know, but it still hurts. We were friends long before you, and she wasn't your friend, Ruth, I interrupted. Not really. Friends don't make you feel like you owe them your happiness. She bit her lip. I don't want to be the reason you two are at war. I took her hand, squeezing gently. You're not. She is. And trust me, this isn't about you. This is about Laura not being able to handle losing control. Ruth nodded, but the doubt was still there, lingering like a storm cloud. And I knew that Laura had planted exactly the seed she wanted. A few days later, Laura made her next move. It was late. I had just finished a run and was heading up to my apartment when I noticed a familiar figure leaning against my door. Laura. She was dressed carefully, too carefully. A silky red dress hugged her figure, her lips painted in the same deep shade I once found irresistible. Once. She smiled as I approached, but it wasn't warm. It was calculated. You look good, she murmured, eyes trailing over me. Seems like single life is treating you well. I ignored the jab, pulling out my keys. What do you want, Laura? She stepped closer, the scent of her perfume wrapping around me like a noose. I wanted to talk. No, you wanted to play games. She sighed, tilting her head. Can we just stop fighting for a second? Can we go inside? I stared at her. Why? Because, she whispered, her voice soft, almost pleading. I miss you, Andy. I miss us. I let out a humorless laugh. You miss me? I scoffed. You didn't seem to miss me when you were in Santorini with your boy toy. Her lips parted, and for the first time, I saw something real flicker in her expression of shame. She reached for me, her fingers brushing against my arm. I made a mistake, she said. I was stupid, reckless. But I swear, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't move. I didn't react. She took my silence as encouragement. Do you remember, she continued, voice dripping with nostalgia, how we used to sit on the balcony, drinking wine and listening to the city at night? She smiled wistfully. Or how we'd take road trips with no destination, just to get lost together? I did remember. But the memories felt like someone else's life. You can't rewrite history, Laura, I said coolly. We were miserable long before Santorini. Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. I'm willing to fix things, she whispered. If you are. I shook my head. There's nothing left to fix. For a second, just a second, I saw fear in her eyes. Real, undeniable fear. Because for the first time, she understood she had lost me. Laura didn't give up right away. She kept calling, texting, showing up at places she knew I'd be. Trying everything to reel me back in. She used guilt. She used seduction. She used anger. And when none of it worked, she turned on Ruth. Late one night, my phone buzzed. It was Ruth. Andy, she whispered, her voice shaken. Laura came to my apartment. I sat up. What? When? Just now, she said. She wasn't okay. She said I ruined everything. That I took you from her. She said you'll never really love me the way you loved her. I clenched my jaw. She's lying. I know, Ruth whispered. But for a second, I was scared she might be right. I exhaled, forcing my anger down. Ruth, listen to me. I don't love Laura. Not anymore. I love you. Silence. Then, a shaky breath. I love you too, Andy. And that was it. Laura had played her last card. And she had lost. The next day, I called Laura. No more games. No more manipulations. Just the truth. I want you to sign the divorce papers, I said firmly. And I want you to move on. She laughed bitterly. You think it's that easy? It is, I said. For me. A pause. Then, her voice, small and distant. You really don't love me anymore, do you? I closed my eyes. No, Laura, I don't. For the first time in years, I was completely free. And nothing, not even Laura, could take that away from me again. Laura had always been the kind of person who thrived on control. For years, I had let her dictate the rhythm of our marriage, shaping myself into the man she wanted me to be: predictable, stable, safe. And when she had grown bored, she had walked away, assuming she could return whenever she pleased. Now, she was realizing the truth. She had lost me. And Laura was not the kind of woman who handled losing well. It started with a phone call. I was at Ruth's apartment, helping her unpack a few things. She had just moved to a new place, eager for a fresh start. The sun had set, the golden glow of the city spilling through the windows as we shared a quiet moment together. Then my phone rang. Laura. I hesitated before answering, finally pressing the phone to my ear. What do you want, Laura? Her voice was sharp, laced with something close to fury. You think you've won, don't you? I sighed, rubbing my temple. Laura, this isn't a game. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, but it is, Andy. And you don't even know the rules I'm willing to play by. I glanced at Ruth, who was watching me with quiet concern. I stood and walked to the window, lowering my voice. Laura, whatever you're trying to do, just don't. I should ruin you, she snapped. I should ruin both of you. I exhaled, keeping my tone even. You don't have that power anymore. A pause. Then, her voice, colder now. More dangerous. You think Ruth is some kind of saint, she hissed. Do you know what people will say when they find out she jumped into bed with her best friend's husband? That she's nothing but a backstabbing WH enough. My voice came out sharper than I expected, cutting through the air like a blade. Laura fell silent. I don't care what you say about me, I continued. I don't even care what you think about Ruth. But if you try to destroy her, I swear you'll regret it. Laura scoffed. Oh, really? And what are you going to do, Andy? Bore me to death? I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt absolutely nothing for her. No, I said simply. I'm just going to move on. And that's going to kill you more than anything else ever could. Silence. For a moment, I thought she had hung up. Then, her voice, quiet now. You really don't love me anymore, do you? I closed my eyes. No, Laura, I don't. The next day, she signed the divorce papers. She didn't do it with grace. There was no acceptance, no peaceful goodbye. She slammed the pen down after scrawling her name, shoving the documents back at me. Her hands were trembling, but her face was unreadable. That's it, then, she muttered. I nodded. That's it. Laura looked at me for a long time, as if searching for something, a sign of hesitation, a flicker of regret. But I had none left to give. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and stood. Goodbye, Andy. And just like that, she was gone. I met Ruth later that evening at the park. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a cool breeze whispering through the trees. She was sitting on a bench, arms wrapped around herself, lost in thought. When she saw me approaching, she stood. Well, she asked, her voice soft. It's done, I said. She sighed. Relief washed over her face, but there was still something hesitant in her eyes. And now what? I smiled, stepping closer. Now, we move forward. Ruth searched my face. Are you sure? I don't want to be something you fall into just because you're hurt. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers with hers. Ruth, this was never about revenge, I said. Not for me. Not for you. What we have, it's real. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. Then she smiled. Not a careful smile. Not a hesitant one. A real, genuine smile. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Completely. Utterly. Free. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Well, what would you have done in Andy's place? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay tuned for more gripping tales. See you soon.